in today's tutorial. It's the battle of the watercolor paints. We'll compare the Crayola with the Sakura koi set by painting the same floral motif, and then we'll talk about the benefits of both brands. So let's introduce our players. On the left, we have the Crayola washable watercolor set of 24 discs. And then on the right, I have my koi watercolor disc set from Sakura. I'm so sorry, Sakura. I know this set looks like crap. I'm just not very good at taking care of my watercolor paints, but I do love them and I use them hard. So a lot of them are like really welled out from being put away wet. But that has nothing to do with anything except for how I keep my supplies. Okay, so what I've done here is drawn the same floral design on two sides of the same piece of watercolor paper. I've got it on a piece of transfer paper or a piece of tracing paper here, and then I've just transferred it using graphite transfer paper. And I just wanted to do a watercolor floral because that's something I do all the time, so it's something I'm comfortable with, and it's a big part of what we do on this channel. So we've got this identical design. It's on rough watercolor paper. One thing I'll mention is that I am going to be using good brushes. Look at the mop that this Crayola set comes with. It's just might be fine for kids, but that's not what we're going to use today. We'll be using our proper brushes. I'm using the nylon round from Winsor & Newton. And I'm just going to jump right in and start with the Crayola set. That's the first one I'll use. I'm mixing up some purple here, pretty much using the colors that are in the pans or in the discs, but mixing a little black into the darker shade there just to give it some depth and dimension. And then I'm just getting started. I've already got the design all drawn out, so I know exactly what I want to do. I want some of these petals to be quite light. I want the underside of the petal, the part that's curling up, to be quite dark, and then I want there to be a little bit of shading or shadow at the bottom of some of the petals where they wouldn't be getting as much light, and you can see me adding a little bit more dark purple right there. So I've got a game plan, and I'm going to try my best to treat each painting the same, or each design the same. And so far so good with the Crayola. I'm using just a variation of sort of darker purples and light purples to color in each petal and add a little bit of extra shadow and shading to each petal. And eventually here you'll see me go in and add an even really dark purple on the underside. And the paints seem to be working pretty well. You can see I've got these lighter petals. Now I'm adding that dark purple to the underside. But I did start to notice, especially as I watched it back on the video and as I was painting, that the paints were sort of bleeding out a little after I left them. So you can see now that some of the very first things that I painted, the edges are just looking a little soft and fuzzy, and nothing's quite as sharp as I would really like it to be. And that's not the end of the world, but I did just get a little more bleeding and a few sort of fuzzy spots that I wasn't overly happy with. I finished the purple flower and I wanted to mix up some green, and you can see here my choices are limited. The one green is super minty, the other is like green grass. And so what I did is I mixed a dark purple into those greens to create a more sophisticated color, and then I mixed in lots of water as well so that I would get this muted minty color that just has a little more character. And that's what I'm using here. I'm just getting started and painting in these leaves. And this doesn't have anything to do with the battle of these paints, but I will just love to mention that transferring your design onto your watercolor paper ahead of time and perfecting it in your sketchbook and then transferring it with that tracing paper, it just sets you up for success, even using paints that I'm not super comfortable with and that aren't the greatest. Because I have an outline here, it's like coloring in a coloring book. It's fun. I'm not confused about where I'm going with the paint. If you're a beginner with watercolor, setting yourself up for success with the initial sketch transferred to the page ahead of time is such a great idea. And now I'm finishing up my first piece here, which is some dark saturated black paint, and I'm making the stamen there with the little circles in the center. And then I'm adding just a little more shading, some darker purple on some of these petals. I'm really seeing now how some of them have bled together without me noticing. And I'm just trying to go in with the tip of my brush and a little bit of a darker shade. I'll try to add some detail that will add some definition to this piece, this fuzzy piece. All right, that one's done. I won't show you all of it in its entirety. We'll move right along over to the right-hand side. I've mixed up a very similar purple with my Koi palette. My Koi palette, of course, it has more colors, but it's not really about getting the colors exactly right today. So I'm just trying to match to the Crayola. And I'm just starting out in the same way here. I've got a nice watery purple. I'm coloring in or painting in some of the insides of these petals. I'll go in with the darker purple to do the underside later. And so I'm just painting these and filling in. Again, so easy when you have that sketch laid out for you. Makes it so much easier to be successful. Now I'm mixing up that darker purple and I want to just add a little bit of shadow. Now you can see right away how much more successful this is. It bleeds out into that petal, into that light purple ever so beautifully and causes a really nice variation of color. And that's just something that comes with a nicer paint. And also a good paper is important to have for that to really work as well. And of course this test is not at all, scientific. We're using great paper from Canson, we're using great brushes, and then we're just comparing these wonderful student quality paints to these Crayola paints. But I think you'll find that the Crayolas don't stack up too badly, and if anything, I'd just like to show that they're pretty good actually, considering they cost $5, but that there are some wonderful nuances that you do get when you do spend the extra money. So both have their merit. And here you see me adding the same way I did on the other piece, just a little bit of darker purple for depth and definition and shading. I've already done the darker undersides. Now I just want some of the lower part of each petal to be a little darker because the light wouldn't hit there quite as easily. Okay, and then I'm gonna mix up a nice minty green. I did mix a little purple into this as well to give it that sophisticated character of color. And I am just painting the leaves, trying to leave some little highlights. It's always good to leave a little bit of negative space because of the way light would naturally hit and sort of speckle a leaf or a petal. And here you can see when these two areas, the light leaf and the dark leaf, hit each other, they do bleed, which I didn't do intentionally, but the bleeding happens in sort of a pretty way. And I also found with the Crayolas, the bleeding was kind of a mess. If I made a mistake and two watery areas got too close together and started bleeding, it was kind of all over. Whereas with the Koi set, I always find there's sort of happy accidents and things that just happen to work out and look nice. So that maybe didn't happen as much with the Crayola set. Okay, so that's them, the two of them. I think the Crayola, I thought it went really well when I did it, and then the side by side, I was like, ooh, it looks like I sort of smeared Vaseline on that side of the lens, and so there's a lack of definition there. Definitely not as many happy accidents. As we get really close here, you can see some areas. There's sort of where you see that darker ring around some of the leaves. So that is an accident that I don't make very often. So I guess I was just a little more prone to it with the cheaper paints. And then here, when we look at the Koi, you can see sometimes when the bleeding occurred, it actually ends up looking really pretty. So those were just some of the things I noticed without making this video too long-winded. I think the outcome speaks for itself, and if you have any questions, be sure to comment below and let me know. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.